Good evening and welcome to the Return to Rowing Webinar 2. My name is Kenny Bailey. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Communications at British Rowing, and it's a pleasure to introduce the second webinar on Return to Rowing this evening. It's actually looking like a clear and warm evening across the country, so many thanks to you all for taking time to log in. And also thank you to everyone who's taken the trouble to send in questions in advance of this webinar. I'm delighted to introduce our panel this evening. Dr. Anne Redgrave, the Chief Medical Officer and the GB Rowing Team Doctor. Nick Hubble, Chair of the Sport Committee and one of the country's leading volunteers in the sport. And Paul Lorenzato, Head of Community Development at British Rowing. Andy Parkinson, the Chief Exec, would have been on the panel tonight. In fact, he was planned to be on the panel on last week's webinar, when it was originally scheduled. But with the delay to publishing a recent guidance from the delay from DCMS, it meant that Andy had to miss tonight's webinar, so he sends his apologies. And Nick and Paul are all key members of British Rowing's Coronavirus Situational Review Group, and we meet every Monday to review and discuss the latest developments with coronavirus and advise Andy and the senior management team. British Rowing Deputy Chair Kate O'Sullivan is also on this group, acting as a conduit with the regional chairs and the regional representatives. And so the information given to Andy and the directors team is as broad and informed as possible. A key output of these meetings and discussions is our Return to Rowing advice document. And last week, on the 23rd of July, we published version 5. For those of you that haven't seen it yet, it can be accessed and downloaded from our website at britishrowing.org. From version 1, we acknowledge that the guidance does not cover every possible scenario, and there may be some that we have missed, but we aim to provide the key principles and a framework for the sport to work with to get back up and running. It's also worth highlighting again, I think, on page 2 of the guidance, under the important notes section, it calls out a number of key areas of focus, which I think are important principles for us as an organisation who has to make decisions, and for everyone else running clubs and coaching crews to help inform the decision making as well. One last thing before we get into the questions is to highlight that we now need approval from the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, before we can publish our Return to Rowing and competition guidance. So this is another layer of complexity that we do need to work through. As I say, this webinar was meant to be last week, and so it was delayed by 7 days. So thank you very much for your patience and for joining us again this evening. We have had a number of questions sent through in advance, and so we've grouped these together, and we'll run through them first. Please do send us your questions through the questions panel, and we'll do our best to get through as many as possible before 8 o'clock tonight. The first big topic that we've had a lot of questions about before tonight's webinar is really on the subject of crew boats and the reintroduction of crew boats. So Nick, as Chair of the Sport Committee, you've been heavily involved both with the weekly situational review group meeting, which comprises, as I say, of staff and volunteers, but also a large group of volunteers who have been looking at other aspects of the sport and returning to getting the sport up and running. So could you just summarise for us what the reintroduction of crew boats will look like?
Yeah, I think firstly it's important to just reiterate one of the points you made earlier, Kenny. It's about us trying to set a framework around the government guidance to allow a return to team sport. It's about us trying to set a framework to enable clubs and individuals, should they wish to return to crew boat rowing, for them to be able to do so. But you know, it's not about us telling people to go back crew rowing. People should still risk assess stuff, and if they're comfortable with it, then that's fine. If they're not, then that's also fine in not going back, you know. But the framework that we've set has been a steady phased approach, which has been approved. Principally from the 1st of August, we're back in, well, we're already in singles, but we can introduce mixed household doubles and coxless pairs. From the 15th of August, we're introducing, or we're saying that it's okay to introduce cox fours, coxless fours, and quads. And then from the 29th of August, we've got approval to reintroduce 8s and octos. Now, obviously, the caveat there is that everything, as far as the government goes, is continuing down the route that they believe the virus is going.
Brilliant. And I guess, Anne, a number of medical and sort of scientific elements have been looked at when considering this. Clearly the government have got their own view, but as a governing body looking at this, what were some of the key considerations that we looked at when looking at reintroducing crew boats?
Well, essentially we had to make sure that we were maintaining behaviour which minimised spread of the virus. Complicated by the fact that you can be asymptomatic with this virus. The government had moved to 1 metre plus, so 1 metre plus meaning you could be as close as 1 metre to each other, but in certain situations you would need to wear a face mask, as everyone now knows. Supermarkets, anywhere indoors, when you're less than a metre away from someone, the face mask is required. But when you look at exercising in individuals, wearing a face mask inhibits the breathing, and certainly within the team, within the Great Britain rowing team, the athletes expressed a preference to not consider wearing face masks. So they felt so strongly that they would maintain themselves in smaller boats if they had to wear a face mask. When you consider face mask in exercising individuals, because of the dampness of the breath, the face mask becomes wet very quickly, and that can encourage the virus to actually stick. So this debate is whether a face mask is actually going to be protective in an exercising individual. Of course, we're an outdoor sport, so we after some consideration and looking at the science, believe that because we're an outdoor sport, so long as once you've got into the boat, you actually do go out and get on with the outing and don't sit around chatting for long periods of time, then your risk is minimized. And then as soon as you get back out of the boat again after the outing, you should return to more normal social distancing. So I think it is safe, but it is, the caveat of course is that before you get into a boat, you are checked to make sure that you're fit and healthy. There should be somebody, the coach potentially of a crew, or somebody at the club who's checking the health of anybody coming to the site, making sure that they are not exhibiting any symptoms, even mild symptoms. And if they are exhibiting symptoms, they should be barred from coming to go training that particular day and sent home. If they're considered healthy and they maintain hand hygiene and social distancing outside of the boat, then the risk should be reduce as much as possible in a safe, clean environment.
Thanks, and it's really interesting to you say that, because although the guidance is really there for everybody to as we say and repeatedly say, to give a framework, the decision making on the ground, particularly if people are presenting even with mild symptoms, is something that we just want to highlight again for clubs, that they have to take an element of responsibility in this as well, and that the guidance can only go so far.
Absolutely, and the individuals need to themselves take some responsibility. You can't. The virus is, as everyone has heard, it's not a nice illness. If you get it even mildly, it can hang around for a very long time, and it's better to say, I'm not going to train today and miss maybe one session and find actually it wasn't coronavirus and it was just a cold and you're actually going to be fine, than risk going out and then finding out too late that you've got coronavirus and suffering post-viral fatigue, which with this particular virus is actually lasting for months.
And so everyone arrives, the risk assessment's been done, people are happy, people are healthy, we want to get the boats out in the water. It's really good to see that we'll also have coxes back on the water soon too. What are the suggested precautions? I mean, even for coxes in particular, a lot of the questions we've had recently have been around PPE and our guidance around PPE. What would you just sort of explain a bit of the rationale behind our guidance around PPE and COXs, face masks, face protections, face coverings. But I think people would love to hear what your take on that is.
So I think the COX is an interesting part of the crew, that they are obviously sat still, not moving in the same way as the rowers within the crew, and particularly in a boat where they sit in front of the stroke person, then they are exposed to the aerosol of the stroke of the crew. So I think any COX should be wearing a face covering, just as they have to in a supermarket or any other indoor area where they're closer than 1 meter to somebody. The question then arises, though, that, you know, what's a face covering? A face covering could be anything. It doesn't have to be a face mask. It could be a scarf. It could be a thin neck, but it needs to cover their nose and mouth. And there is some debate about whether you should include the eyes in that. So on our guidance, we have suggested that COXs should consider a face mask and a visor, because that covers all things. But the visor, of course, could be a pair of goggles. Visors are on their own, are often lifted up, as you may well have seen in restaurants recently. And if you lift a visor up, then you've got no face covering on whatsoever, and you're laying yourself open to either contracting the virus yourself or handing it out to other people. So to play safe, we have written in our guidance a face mask and a visor. That can be interpreted in many ways, but the message is that the COX should protect themselves from the aerosols being generated by the crew. So it could be a face mask and a visor, it could be goggles and a face mask. That they need to interpret it in terms of what they personally are going to use. I know we had some questions about, are visors reusable? They are, if the same person is going to use it. They just need to clean the visor with the appropriate cleaning equipment, cleaning agent, just as they would anything else in the gym inside their own club. So a visor is reusable. It doesn't have to be thrown away on a single use, not in the situation that we're talking about. So I think the advice that we've put in our document, which suggests visor and face mask, it's good advice. We have to cover every scenario, and each club needs then, or each COX then needs to work out what actually fits them personally. But to end up with a solution of protecting their own eyes and nose and mouth is where they need to be. And using a COX box, they need to clean their own COX box if they've got one. If they can have personal equipment, that's probably the best way to be. Just with the face mask and the visor, personal COX box, that means that only they are using it and only they are touching the system, and that's playing as safe as possible.
Brilliant, Anne, thanks a lot. Moving on to group sizes, Nick, we've selected a group size of 12. Would you just like to explain to people why we settled on that number?
Yeah, we debate the back to rowing group and then the strategic review group debated long and hard really about things like this, and we were looking at wanting to be as loose, I'll say, with clubs as we possibly could be in how different clubs or schools would need to operate. The group of 12 was based around an 8 with a support group really, or 2 4s with support groups. So if we took an 8 and in a particular circumstance it needed a coach in a coaching launch, and then maybe for whatever reason a safety crew, that was how that number was made up. But it's any permutation of that. So, you know, arguably it could be 10 scullers and a couple of coaches. It really, that's how it was formed.
Okay, brilliant, thanks very much. And Paul, some questions related to crew boats apply to fixed seat rowing. How would you say all of this applies to fixed seat rowing?
The rules are the same for fixed seat rowing as they are for sliding seat rowing. in the sense of the social distancing rules and the recommendations that we've made. There is one thing that fixed seat boats tend to be a lot heavier or a bit less manageable to be put in by the crew. So as long as if you've got extra people that are helping you to launch a boat and they are using mitigation as in face masks or whatever, then you can have more people to help you launch those heavier kind of boats. That could also help people later on when we come back to 8s, especially with juniors, where you've got 16 juniors around an octo trying to launch, or you've got some of the recreational boats, the heavier stable recreational boats where you need extra people.
And there was a specific question actually related to fixed seat rowing. Can we row a 6-oared gig with 4 people from 2 families? Someone's asked.
Yes, you can, but you have to first of all do your risk assessment. That's the first thing. And in that risk assessment, you should be looking at whether that boat is stable to do that. As in, you are so many kilos lighter than what the boat was designed for. So is the boat now stable? Is it actually worth rowing in the boat in that form, in that configuration? Or what are you actually going to get out of it? So you need to do that risk assessment first and do it that way. So if you traditionally have a 6-seater boat and you are rowing it with 4 people, yes, when we can row with 4 people on the 15th of August, but you've got to do that risk assessment on the stability of the boat.
Right, okay. Thanks very much. Now, we're just trying to keep this as interactive as possible. We've had a lot of questions come through actually over the last 15 minutes. And so one of the questions comes from Doug Jackson. And the question is, I don't think you mentioned blades in the guidelines. Should individual rowers carry their own blades rather than usual practice of a couple of people carrying the whole crew's blades to and from the launch? Nick, what do you reckon?
I'd say yes to that. I'd say that wherever possible, we still need to think about social distancing and personal touch points. So I've certainly seen clubs where they're currently going out sculling. They're saying to people, you know, take your sculls over and then go back and fetch your boat. And I think that's really good practice going out with crew boats as well.
Right, and just another question that comes back to face covering. Actually, it's just to reiterate the fact, I think it probably would be worth just going over this again. So just to clarify, the question from Daniela James says, there should be someone at each outing who takes responsibility for checking all rowers are fit and well. I think that's probably yes.
Yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think just on that, we're also saying that in the guidance about clubs needing to keep a record of who's going out, so that we've got a record for 21 days for test and trace. Yeah.
And then Colin Lewis asked a question, just to clarify, Colin, has DCMS said yes to the plan to reintroduce crew boats? They've agreed to crew boats, but we still need their approval on competitions. So I hope that clarifies. We have to get 2 levels of approval, one on we have to get one on crew boats and one on competitions, and we haven't got the approval on competitions yet. Any other questions coming in related to this? Just so, Nick, moving on to competitions, a huge amount of work has gone in to looking at how we can get the sport back up and running, back up and racing as soon as possible. Questions submitted before the webinar, a lot of people are wanting to know, for example, what is the likelihood of early season head races taking place in either singles or crew boats? And then what hope can you give us to allow crew boats, intra, inter, club, open events in the autumn? Just explain to everybody listening in and tuning in what our plans are and what we've been looking at with regards to competitions, please.
Yeah, so again, there's been a subgroup looking at competition of all levels, in fact, and we've always said that we take a phased approach again to getting back to this, and the phased approach really is for several reasons. If we can start small, we can see what works without involving a lot of people. We can grow that. That's where we, I think it was in our initial guidance, we said we'd be looking at sort of intra-club stuff and then followed by inter-club, and which is in effect private match stuff, and then looking at getting back to heads. We're pretty close on getting a document back to the DCMS now on competition, and it'll then be in their hands to approve it. But there has been a lot of work gone on, and I'm really grateful to that group of volunteers and staff that have put a lot of time and effort into that. I guess at this stage, what we can say is watch this space. As soon as we get approval from the DCMS, we will be publishing guidance.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that is something which we just can't predict. I mean, for what it's worth to everybody tuning in, it took about 2 weeks to get approval from DCMS on crew boats. And there was really no rhyme or reason to that. That's just how long it took. We would like to think it would take less than that or as quick as possible, but it could take longer than that. We're unfortunately probably at the whim of government and also other sports that are asking for sign off as well. On a lot of, I guess for a lot of clubs out there, Paul, getting people through the doors, not just current members, but also trying to attract new members. We've had a couple of questions about Learn to Row. Now, I think it's probably fairly obvious, but what advice would you give to people in clubs who are looking at getting Learn to Row courses back up and running?
First of all, you've got to look at your Learn to Row course and its viability. So if it was done on 40 people being done on a course and we can only do 12, then is it viable to run your Learn to Row course? If it is viable to run your Learn to Row course, then it's whatever your policy was prior to COVID-19. And can you make that course COVID secure? So meeting the guidelines of 12 people, social distancing, how did your course run? What did you do? How did you seek people? How did you do the on-land bit? You all needs to be re-looked at. But if you can make it COVID secure, then there's no reason why you can't do it.
Okay. Paul, sticking with yourself, gyms. Gyms are obviously, and gyms within clubs are a big part of the club's activity. One of the questions we've been asked is, may I use an ergo out of doors? What a general advice and would you give to clubs who are looking to reopen their gyms or get their gyms operating as best they can? Okay,
let's take the one for an ergo outside. Yes, that's not a problem as long as you're practicing social distancing outside. So yes, you can do a bit of technique work or whatever, but remember you've got to still apply social distancing. Or if you're closer than that, then you've got to put mitigation in place and face mask or whatever. Looking for clubs opening gyms, that is a huge question, and one of the best places for advice on that is CIMSPA, which is the Chartered Institute of Management for Sports and Physical Activity. They've got some really good stuff on their website about it. One of the key things that clubs will have to look at once they've looked at the space issue, which is basically if you take a piece of equipment, you've got to put a 3 meter square around it. So that's the first limiting factor. The other one is actual ventilation and how you get a constant airflow of new air through your gym space. because you have got a air conditioning system, check whether that air conditioning system is 100% outside air being brought in and chilled, or whether it's recycled air. Because if it's recycled air that's being chilled, then your answer is you've got to turn it off. So then how do you ventilate your space? But Simspa is one of the best places to look at for that. But it is going to take clubs a little while to risk assess and be able to actually deal with inside gym spaces.
And just on ventilation, Paul, one question that's come in as well is it's any guidance that we can give on how long we think clubs should leave between people training in an indoor space. So we have some guidance and that we believe helps groups of 12 get out on the water. But do you have any guidance currently for people using indoor space and time between people training?
Simple answer is no, I don't. But I will go away and have a look and see if I can come up with some guidance. At the moment, every time the government produces a new piece of information, the amount of documents that we have to look at for clubs increases exponentially, because clubs aren't just rowing clubs, they're social clubs, they're places where you go and eat, there's places where you go and drink. So I will go and have a look, and I will come back with an answer on that one if I can find any guidance buried somewhere.
So just on you go, man.
Is that after somebody's used a piece of equipment in the gym, they also need to clean it. So they need to wipe it down with antibacterial wipes or the appropriate user cloth, and have a supply of cleaning fluid so that they can be wiped down. And that needs to happen between different individuals using the same piece of equipment.
Yeah, and actually cleaning's come up a few times, questions around advice and guidance we can give around cleaning. One of the questions was, what guidance can we offer clubs with no paid cleaners to ensure COVID secure status in gyms and in future for changing areas? I think what we would say is that, I'll take this one on, that clubs must be organised either through a contracted cleaner, a paid cleaner, or club volunteers. And if no cleaning arrangements can be made, then we advise clubs to consider opening at all. Cleaning is critical to all of this. So there's no, the guidance doesn't say that the cleaning has to be by professional paid cleaners. I think as long as the cleaning is done to the right standard, it can be done by club volunteers. But clearly, if a cleaning cannot be done at all, then we would just caution whether the activity can take place at all, or even if the club can open at all if the club can't be cleaned. Just going back to group sizes. Yep.
Sorry. Just on that one though, I think if as we say, there's nothing wrong with volunteers cleaning. All I would say is people really need, I know we bang on about risk assessment, but people really need to question their risk assessment or get somebody else to check it over, that what plans they say they're going to put in place are actually manageable, so that the job is carried out. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Right. Nick, going back to group sizes of 12, so a club has done a great risk assessment. Athletes are turning up, athletes and coaches are turning up, and they're all fit and healthy. Track and trace is in place, and crews are wanting to get out on the water. Just practically, how do you see groups of 12, multiple groups of 12 being managed over the course of a day or a session for a club who are looking to get people back out on the water?
I think there's some good examples out there already in the clubs, with groups of 6 that are going out. There's a mixture of how they're operating. Some are just operating with a group at the club at any one time, or on the water at any one time. Others have got a staggered boating pattern, which I think is fine. So argument's sake, that there's a group going out, a group of 6 boating at 9 o'clock in the morning. There might be another group boating at 1:15 or 9:30, but they're still acting as individual groups out on the water. People are operating good booking systems. There's plenty of them that are free or quite cheap actually online, and that is how people need to manage it. But again, they need to risk assess it. They need to go through their management procedures. Probably, you know, have somebody appointed to each session to actually manage the session, I'd say.
And the definition, I'm just looking here, what is classified as a group? Everyone on the rowing club site, or a training squad, or something else? E.g., could we have people socialising and using social distancing rules elsewhere on site, as well as having a squad on the water? Yeah, so what do we define as a group? Is it everyone in the rowing club site, or a training squad, or something else? Any thoughts? Probably.
Okay. I'll take the first bit. If you've got a group of people at a club who happen to be continuing to encourage drinking or socialising in the club atmosphere, then that would be, I would say, is one group. And as long as they're in social distancing, and then you've got another group of 12 that are social distancing somewhere else or doing activity somewhere else. That would be my take on it. I wouldn't say because you've got 12 people in the premises that that's the only 12 people you can have.
Okay. Moving on to quite a few questions about launches. So Nick, question came in: what mitigation regarding launches? What mitigation is necessary for 2 people on a safety launch where 2-meter distancing cannot be maintained on the launch?
I think that the key there was in the wording of the question. It's the mitigation. We're closer than 2 meters, so therefore we need to put some form of mitigation in place, and that for me could be, you know, again, a face covering, a visor, or one of the same. We've put information out there, guidance about safety launches and the wearing of PPE. I know there's been some questioning around it as to whether that PPE should be worn all the time in readiness for going and doing a rescue. Our view is that it should be. If you look at football, for instance, you know, you look at the physios on the touchline, they're already PPE'd up, ready to go and react, and that's what I think we should do. But I mean, I think in a launch, you know, I'm struggling to think of a launch that is less than 2 meters in length. So, you know, a good example would be maybe whoever's helming the launch is sitting there helming it, and then the second crew member is actually in the bows of the boat, for instance. You know, that's getting as much distance as you possibly can.
Thank you very much. Just going to go back to some questions, Anne, around so touching on the matter of what a club should do if somebody who has been at the club tests positive. Thanks, William Sarder, for that one. What would you say?
If somebody tests positive, what will anyway happen now, if they've been tested positive by the NHS, the club will be asked who was on site at the time that the person had been at the club, and those people are likely to be contacted by Track or Trace and will have to actually go into isolation themselves for a period of time in case they incubate the virus. So in effect, anyone who has been in a training bubble with that individual will be put into isolation.
Okay. Just to say, if the questions are coming in, I'm struggling to keep up with the number of questions that are coming in. what would you say? I guess one general question that's come in is, how would we manage the reintroduction of lockdowns? What would we say if it's local lockdowns or national lockdowns? Paul, if once we've seen a situation in Leicester where a local lockdown came back in, how would you say? What advice would you say to clubs and members out there who would manage a reintroduction of a lockdown?
The first bit of advice is whatever process that you have put in place to open your club, you also have to have a reverse process to close it. One of the factors that also people have got to consider is what the Navigational Authority or the people who own the water that you use say. Now, if you go into a local lockdown like they did in Leicester, the Canals and River Trust just turned around and reintroduced lockdown rules. No movement of boats on that area. Therefore, you cannot go out. Now, it may be that you can still enter your premises, but you may well not be out on the water. Or you might not be able to enter your premises, but can go out on the water because the Navigational Authority haven't done it. So clubs have got to be flexible, but my biggest thing for them is if you've made a policy to open, you must have a policy to reverse it.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Anyone else? Anything on that, Nick or Anne, in terms of reversing the decisions around, say, medical, or how you might want to reintroduce that, or anything you want to add to that?
I think, I mean, as Paul said, I think it's really important that clubs have a plan, because unfortunately, as we head towards winter, and you've only got to look at, the changes in the quarantine, because other countries in Europe are seeing an increase in the numbers of cases, it is likely that we are going to see either the whole country or parts of the country will be shut down for periods of time. So clubs do need to be prepared for the fact that we potentially will be walking back from where we have come, and we cannot assume that because we are now talking about crew boats and opening up the club further, that we are going to be on a continuous journey which just takes us back to where we've come from. I think regional lockdown is probably should be considered to be almost inevitable. It is going to happen in areas of the country, and different parts of the country are going to be able to do different things. We're already beginning to see it between Scotland, Wales and England, but it could be actually, smaller areas than that they're going to face it. And I think the other thing to just raise from a medical perspective is, at the moment, although we're opening up clubs, we are not able to use showers, and potentially we're not going to be able to use them for some time to come. Changing rooms are beginning to be opened up, but you can only use a changing room with social distancing. So that, for a lot of clubs, means actually they can't open their changing rooms because they're very small. So you have to go back to what your personal club's situation is and consider whether it's viable to do so or not. And without showers, athletes should be turning up in the kit that they're going to go out training in and go home and shower afterwards, perhaps bring a change of clothing so that they can actually go home dry. It's summer still at the moment, but it's likely that the shower situation isn't going to change as we head in towards the autumn and winter, so the weather's going to deteriorate. So people do need to think about what they're bringing to training, where they're going to be leaving it if changing rooms are not particularly large, because they've got to access the changing room to get their kit bag if they've left it there. So just things to think about as we head towards the autumn, and more activity hopefully in our clubs, but with the caveat that we can always be going in the wrong direction and be closing down again.
So, and that's quite, I mean, as the weather gets colder, that still applies, unfortunately. So even if people are cold and soaking wet, the thought of opening up the changing rooms and the showers and putting all on to let people heat is something that, unfortunately, we've got to guard against.
Yeah.
Just in terms of, Paul, in terms of a club and the amount of cleaning that a club should consider, one question has come in and I said, how often do you suggest having a full clean of our gyms and toilets? So the toilet is open, you know, the risk assessment has said that the toilet can be open. Are we looking at, I mean, there'll be a certain amount of reasonableness expected here in terms of how many people have been through the building, but would you suggest that it's either weekly or daily or monthly, just based on the amount of footfall that has come through the club? They have to make a local decision.
Well, okay, the first thing I've got to say is go back to whatever you decided in your risk assessment. I know this sounds like a crack record, but whatever you decided in your risk assessment when you opened your toilets, that's where you've got to abide by. Now, if you've got, I really don't care whether you've got one person using the toilet or you've got 100 people using the toilet. If that person is one of them, that one person or one of that 100 is got COVID, then you clean it every time you use it.
Yeah.
As you know, as much as you practically can.
Okay. Got a question here. Let me just quickly. Crews often, someone can jump in here. Crews often share boats and previously have passed a boat straight onto another crew without taking it off the water. Would you be happy with this, assuming the boat and blades are cleaned in situ between outings?
I would say up until the point of your last statement, no, I wouldn't have been. But if the boat is cleaned and the handles and everything else is cleaned, yes, I would say you could do it.
Okay, okay.
And the athletes coming to take out the boat next should also use sanitizer or wash their hands before they go out, so they know that they're already clean too. And
if we really wanted to put belt and braces on it, then the people taking over the boat should have mitigation on until they're clear of social distancing is then achieved with the people who are leaving the boat.
A question here, I think it's been covered off safety boats already, but just in case anyone's missed it, if it's not already on your list, Nick, what is the current position on use of safety boats given the 1 metre plus system of social distancing now in force?
So on safety boats, if you risk assessed it and you need a safety boat there, we've put guidance out there. It's PPE. It's trying to socially distance as much as you can prior to activating a rescue. Wearing the PPE, we're recommending all the time. Launching and getting a boat off the water, it's thinking about touch points and sanitizing those. And then realistically, you know, if we need to get somebody out of the water, we've got to be as careful as we can. But we are talking, it's a safety boat, and if it's a life issue, then you know that's what we've got to look at, sustaining life first and foremost.
Just sticking with actually back to competition. Sorry, a question here about bigger tideway head races. So bigger tideway head races, thanks Jerry Mitchell for sending this one in, need to commit to some expenses quite early. Do we think the DCMS approval for competitions might be forthcoming by September? Jerry, I think we would like to think it will be before September, with all the usual caveats, yes. What sort of timescale are we proposing between the introduction of private matches and open competitions? Last question, which is quite an interesting question. Will there be any discouragement of travelling long distances to events? Now, I would say previous at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, non-essential travel was a message that was sent across loud and clear, and it was actually part of our considerations and our guidance in the early stages that we didn't think that people should be travelling long distances or even potentially short distances if it was non-essential. So will there be any discouragement of travelling long distance events? I think it would probably be based on government guidelines. and if it's saying that non-essential travel is still not recommended, then we would have to take that into consideration. But just going back to the sort of the timescale between the introduction of private matches and open competitions, Nick, if you just maybe just remind people what we're trying to do around competitions in case I've missed it earlier.
I think, yeah, I mean, briefly, it's a phased approach again, the same as getting back into rowing has been. It's a cautious approach. We want to encourage intra-club stuff to start off with, small scale. So it might be, an intra-club head or something. We then want to ideally go to inter-club, so it's where we've got clubs on the same stretch of water, ideally, or maybe not too far between them. Maybe they can use committee boats, for instance, albeit when I say committee boats, I mean use one club's boat and continually clean them between crews. And then looking at, the future has to be getting back to hopefully our head season. But as we've said, it is all dependent upon what the government allows us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The questions are coming in. I'm trying to get through as many as we can in the last 14 minutes. And maybe one for you. What happens when a rescued person, hopefully it doesn't happen very often, but what happens when a rescued person is then an additional person in the launch without a face covering? So the people in the launch have got the right level of protection and mitigation, but what would happen if the rescued person doesn't have any mitigation or face coverings? What sort of advice could we give them?
So actually certainly within the team, we've advised that all our coaches have within their first aid pack a mask for the patient, so for the person being rescued. If you went to rescue somebody and you have to get very close, you need to be able to put a face covering on them as well as yourself, so they should be additional in the safety boat for the person they are rescuing.
And that's actually in our guidance as well.
Thank you. One, Paul, for you around remind clubs, should they consider Legionnaire's disease when showers are left unused for a long time? So, what showers are on the list, explicitly on the list, saying showers are not to be used, so they could be used for quite a long time. Should they consider Legionnaire's disease?
There is also guidance in the document as it stands for how to clean showers and do thermal cleaning of them, as in running hot water through them and all the rest of it before they're used. But there is guidance already in our advice on that.
Thanks very much. What we got here? We'll cover off blades. Are face coverings recommended when carrying or launching crew boats? So we touched on that earlier, but when boats are being taken from the boathouse down to the water, what would you recommend is the approach that athletes take?
So I think they have to look at their own personal situation. You can look at it two ways. So if you're wanting to apply strict social distancing and you are arranged through your boat appropriately, you could be appropriately apart. But if you can't, and you need maybe more people, maybe it's a young crew and they can't support the weight of the boat properly, you've got more people that then going to be in the crew and you're closer together than the ideal social distancing, then it would be advisable to wear a mask. The question then comes, if you wear a mask to take the boat down, what do you do with it when you get in the boat? And I think if you're going to wear a mask to take the boat down, then you need to have a plastic bag which can be sealed, or something of that so something waterproof that you can take then the mask into the boat with you. You shouldn't be passing stuff down towards the cocks for them to hold. You should keep it with you personally, maybe tuck it into your shorts or put it into your shoes, something so that it can stay with you but not be affected by water sloshing around in the bottom of your boat.
Thank you. Another one around crews, Nick. Post August the 15th with foursomes. If a fixed crew, can this crew sometimes split into doubles or pairs, but among the same four?
Yes, I'd say that was good practice. I'd say that the crew need to keep together as best as they can as a group, so that they are not swapping between 3 4s. But if you've got a 4 there and it's splitting down into 2 doubles, I don't see an issue in that. Again, the same procedures still stand, as Anne said earlier on. It's about, if somebody is showing symptoms, be truthful and don't go to the club and inform others.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just trying to find windmill rowing in a fort. Sorry, I'm just trying to pick up this. When can intra and inter club competitions start? They were originally shown in phases D and E. So we've said on that one that it's part of our return to competition. And it's as soon as possible. We need to submit and then get approval from DCMS and competitions. But we are looking at getting things up and running as soon as possible from early September.
Just to clarify on that, the phasing, Kenny, within our guidance, because of how government guidance changed over time, our phasing has changed now and has elongated out as well. So people need to look at the latest guidance for the phasing chart in there.
Bro, and Paul, question here: will rowing with 2 rowers in 1 and 3 with cocks wearing shield be allowed now?
The answer to that question is no, not until the 14th, when you won't need to put only 2 rowers in a 4-man boat, where you can put 4 rowers in a 4-man boat. The reason, because as of this weekend, you will be able to go out in pairs and doubles, but you cannot use coxes. So coxes don't come in until the 14th.
15th.
So, 15th, sorry. I knew I'd get it wrong at some point. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay.
So there's the answer.
Okay. Just going back to, I think we've actually covered off a lot of the main points here, around crew boat racing, around competitions, face covering, fixed seat rowing, pathway back to competitions, autumn head group sizes. I would, I guess, like to say with the last 5 minutes, Nick, in terms of your take on coronavirus over the last 4 or 5 months and how the sport has managed it, particularly after such a difficult winter, what kind of reassurance do you think you'd like to give clubs and competitions out there that we are doing all we can to make sure that we've put everything in place to get the sport back up and running?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of work going on across the sport. That's within British Rowing, through staff and volunteers really working hard to try and get as good a guidance as we possibly can out there for our clubs and members. There's also been a hell of a lot of good work going on in our clubs in trying to get people back to some form of exercise and some form of club life. We're certainly going to be continuing to work at that for the benefit of the membership and the sport as a whole. It's at times it's difficult because we need to be restrictive in some ways, but then in other ways we need to try and push the envelope so that we can allow people to do as much as they think that they feel safe to do so. Yeah, there's no let up, I would say, from this end to do what we can for the sport.
Yeah, and I think it's just worth saying that Nick has been for everyone listening, Nick has been in the middle of so many conversations and providing so much advice, burning the midnight oil, that has been a huge help to everybody. So thank you very much for that. And I guess for you actually, you're taking part in this webinar tonight, but under normal circumstances, you would have been in Tokyo right now at the Olympics. So, just in terms of everyone out there is obviously rooting for the team, just the mood within the camp just now, and the return to training for the GB rowing team. What would you say?
I think, look, the athletes, initially when we went into lockdown, were obviously quite disappointed that the games were being postponed. It's affected people in all sorts of ways because, as we know, at international level, the sport does go in a 4-year cycle, and there will have been some of the athletes who thought they were about to leave us after Tokyo. They've had to have a rethink. I think we can be fairly certain that all those that we went into lockdown with are remaining with us, certainly for another year. And now there is an optimism. It feels slightly odd because we've all got used to the fact that the games weren't going to happen this year. But, on the news, it's been, this would have been the opening ceremony, this would have been the beginning of competition. And that makes you just feel a bit odd because now we're nowhere near Tokyo and it doesn't feel like it's just around the corner. It is another year to go. But I think there is a cohort of the athletes who think actually we've got another year to get ready, which is probably advantageous so long as we play it right. Unfortunately, we have seen COVID within the national team, and it's not been fun. We have one athlete who has been severely affected by it and actually hasn't been able to train since the beginning of lockdown. So we're now talking since the early middle of March, and we're now end of July, and that one athlete is still unable to consider training in the way they were just before we went into lockdown. So my plea to everybody out there is to please take this virus seriously. It sounds like we're making a lot of fuss. Our advice is based on risk as much as we can and risk mitigation. We're not writing a set of rules, we're giving you advice, and we would plead with you to consider your own situation at your club and apply the advice as well as you can with all the risk mitigation that you can. You really want to avoid the virus at all costs. It is not pleasant. The athletes that I'm talking about have not been hospitalized. They've had mild illness, but it's taken the majority of them 6, 8, 10 weeks to come back to some form of training. And as I say, we still have one who's not yet back.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a sobering thought. Thanks so much, Anne, and good luck with the return to training, and good luck with the next Olympic season. And Paul, just to finish off, I mean, you and your team are very much at the sharp end of trying to provide this advice to clubs. How would you, what reassurances could you give people out there that that you and the team can give them?
We're doing our best with the advice that comes out of the government, which sometimes is about as clear as mud, and we're having to interpret it. And I would say, can I thank the clubs for their patience as well in when this advice comes out. As I say, we look through about 10 different documents now because rowing clubs aren't just sports clubs, they're everything. It does take us a little time to sort through. We don't always get it right, but we do listen to the comments that come back from the clubs. It is really important that we get the comments back from the clubs, and we are doing our best just trying to keep people safe and enjoy our sports safely.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Paul. I mean, you've been a big part of this, of getting everything back up and running as well. So thanks very much. And I guess that just wraps up tonight's Back to Rowing webinar number 2. Thank you very much. At some time, I think we've held steady at about 130 attendees. So thank you very much. It is a lovely evening, and you've decided to tune in and listen to us. So I hope it's been worthwhile for you. Big thanks to Anne and to Nick and to Paul, not just for tonight, but for all the advice and input you've given into the advice and guidance that we are publishing. And yeah, I hope everybody can enjoy their summer and can enjoy what rowing you can do. And if we do have another one of these webinars, and I hope you tune in again, but thanks very much, and have a good evening.